Jacob Fatu just became the target of one of the most vicious and calculated attacks in recent wrestling history, and the man behind it has stepped forward with a declaration that sent chills through the entire locker room. This wasn't just another backstage brawl or a heat-of-the-moment confrontation. This was deliberate, methodical, and designed with one singular purpose in mind: to end Jacob Fatu's career before it reaches its peak. The attacker didn't hold back when cameras caught up with him, laying out his intentions with a cold clarity that left no room for interpretation. He wants Fatu gone, not just defeated, not just humiliated, but completely removed from the sport they both claim to love. And if you think you know where this is heading, trust me when I say the truth behind this attack is far more twisted than anyone could have predicted. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that button now because you won't want to miss a single development in this unfolding chaos. Jacob Fatu has been on an absolute tear since stepping into the spotlight, crushing opponents, and building a reputation as one of the most dangerous competitors to ever lace up a pair of boots. His combination of size, agility, and raw power made him untouchable in the ring, and fans everywhere recognized him as a future cornerstone of the industry. But with success comes envy, and with envy comes enemies. What nobody saw coming was just how deep that enmity ran, or how far someone would be willing to go to stop Fatu's rise. The attack happened after a routine match that Fatu had dominated from bell to bell, another victim added to his growing list of conquered opponents. He was making his way backstage, still riding the high of victory, when he was blindsided in a corridor far from the cameras and the crowd. Multiple witnesses reported hearing the sickening sounds of impact echoing through the hallway, the kind of sounds that make your stomach turn and your blood run cold. Security rushed to the scene within moments, but by the time they arrived, the damage was done. Jacob Fatu was found crumpled against a concrete wall, barely conscious and struggling to comprehend what had just happened to him. His attacker had vanished into the maze of backstage corridors, leaving behind only questions and the haunting image of one of wrestling's brightest stars laid out in a heap. Medical personnel swarmed immediately, checking for broken bones, concussions, and internal injuries while Fatu tried to push them away, his pride refusing to accept the vulnerability of his position. But this wasn't a situation where tough guy mentality could override reality. The attack had been brutal and precise, targeting specific areas that would cause maximum damage and potentially long-term consequences. Fatu was loaded onto a stretcher and transported to a local medical facility for comprehensive evaluation, and the wrestling world held its collective breath waiting for news. The hours that followed were filled with speculation and wild theories about who could have orchestrated such a vicious assault. Fatu had his share of rivals, men he had beaten and embarrassed in the ring, but none seemed capable or motivated enough to cross this particular line. Wrestling has always walked a fine edge between scripted drama and real-life animosity, but this felt different. This felt personal in a way that transcended any storyline or manufactured heat. Social media exploded with reactions, fans demanding answers and justice while fellow wrestlers posted messages of support and disbelief. The company remained tight-lipped during the initial investigation, refusing to confirm details or name suspects while they gathered evidence and interviewed witnesses. But silence only breeds more speculation, and the rumor mill went into overdrive with increasingly outlandish theories about corporate conspiracies, jealous veterans, and even suggestions of outside interference. Then came the moment that changed everything. Footage surfaced from a security camera that had been positioned in an adjacent hallway, capturing just enough of the incident to identify the attacker. The revelation stunned everyone who saw it because the man responsible wasn't some disgruntled midcarder or jealous has been trying to reclaim relevance. It was someone who had been considered a friend, a mentor figure who had publicly praised Fatu's talent and potential on multiple occasions. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound could, transforming what looked like a random act of violence into something far more sinister and premeditated. This wasn't about competition or settling scores from previous matches. This was about something darker, something rooted in a twisted philosophy about what the business should be and who deserves to thrive in it. When the attacker finally agreed to speak, he did so with an unsettling calmness that made his words even more disturbing. He sat down in front of cameras without a hint of remorse or hesitation, ready to explain his actions to a world that desperately wanted to understand what could drive someone to such extremes. His opening statement was chilling in its directness. He said Jacob Fatu represented everything wrong with modern wrestling, a new generation that didn't respect the traditions and sacrifices of those who came before. He claimed that Fatu's rapid rise was unearned, built on flash and athleticism rather than the fundamental storytelling and ring psychology that defined the golden eras. But beneath those criticisms, something far more personal and venomous lurked in his tone, a bitterness that suggested this was about more than just philosophical differences regarding the industry. He continued by detailing how he had watched Fatu's career trajectory with growing frustration, seeing opportunities and spotlight directed towards someone he considered unworthy. According to his twisted logic, eliminating Fatu wasn't just about removing a rival but about sending a message to the entire locker room and the fans who enabled what he saw as the degradation of wrestling itself. He spoke about the attack with clinical detachment, describing how he planned it, how he waited for the perfect moment when Fatu would be isolated and vulnerable, and how he executed each strike with specific intentions. His goal wasn't just to hurt Jacob Fatu but to inflict injuries severe enough that continuing his career would be impossible, forcing him into early retirement and serving as a cautionary tale for anyone else who dared follow the same path. The most chilling part of his confession came when he was asked if he felt any regret about potentially ending another man's livelihood and dreams. He smiled, a cold expression devoid of empathy, and said he would do it again without hesitation. In his mind, he was performing a service to the industry, cutting out a cancer before it could spread further. He compared himself to a surgeon making tough but necessary decisions, completely divorced from the reality that he had committed a brutal assault motivated by jealousy and bitterness dressed up as principled conviction. His words painted him as a man who had convinced himself that his actions were justified, that he was some kind of guardian protecting wrestling's sacred legacy from corruption, when in reality he was just another bitter veteran unable to accept that the world had moved on without him. Backstage reactions to his statements were immediate and fierce. Fellow wrestlers who had once respected him now spoke out publicly, condemning his actions and calling for serious consequences. The locker room that had been divided on many issues found unity in their disgust for what had been done to Jacob Fatu and the cowardly justifications offered afterward. Several prominent figures used their platforms to demand that criminal charges be pursued, arguing that this had crossed every line between professional competition and actual assault. The company found itself in a difficult position, needing to balance the demands for justice with the complex legal and public relations implications of one of their contracted performers committing such an act against another. Lawyers became involved, meetings were held behind closed doors, and the entire situation threatened to spiral into a full-blown crisis that could damage the organization's reputation. Meanwhile, Jacob Fatu himself remained in medical care, undergoing tests and evaluations to determine the full extent of his injuries. Early reports suggested significant damage that would require extensive recovery time, though doctors remained cautiously optimistic that permanent career-ending harm had been avoided. Fatu's social media remained silent during this period, his team carefully controlling information flow while he focused on healing and processing the betrayal. Friends close to him reported that the psychological impact might prove harder to overcome than the physical injuries, the violation of trust and safety cutting deep into his sense of security. Wrestling requires a degree of vulnerability and cooperation between performers, a trust that your opponent won't actually hurt you even while making it look devastating for the cameras. That trust had been shattered, and rebuilding it would be a challenge that extended beyond any rehabilitation program. The attacker's employer faced mounting pressure to take decisive action. Sponsors began making uncomfortable inquiries about their association with an organization that employed someone capable of such violence. Fan groups organized protests and letter-writing campaigns demanding termination and prosecution. The public relations nightmare grew with each passing day, fed by constant media coverage and social media outrage that showed no signs of subsiding. Legal experts weighed in on television and podcasts, debating whether this constituted assault, whether it could be prosecuted despite the often blurred lines in professional wrestling, and what precedent any legal action might set for the industry. The attacker himself seemed almost pleased by the attention, his narcissism feeding off the notoriety even as it destroyed his career and reputation. Inside sources revealed that Jacob Fatu had received overwhelming support from unexpected corners of the wrestling world. Veterans who had never worked with him sent messages of encouragement. Rival companies reached out to offer assistance if he needed it. Fans organized fundraisers to help with medical expenses despite not knowing if he even needed financial support. The attack, intended to destroy Fatu's career and send a message of intimidation, had instead galvanized the community around him and exposed his attacker as nothing more than a bitter, delusional individual whose time had passed. The twisted irony wasn't lost on observers who noted that the attacker had accomplished the exact opposite of his stated intentions, elevating Fatu to sympathetic hero status while cementing his own legacy as a cautionary tale about unchecked ego and resentment. As weeks passed, Jacob Fatu began his recovery process, determined not to let this assault define the trajectory of his career. Physical therapy sessions became his new battleground, each small victory in regaining strength and mobility fueling his determination to return stronger than ever. He finally broke his silence with a statement that was measured but defiant, thanking those who had supported him while making it clear that he refused to be intimidated or driven away from the profession he loved. Fatu acknowledged that the road back would be long and difficult, but he framed it as just another challenge to overcome, another obstacle that would ultimately make him more resilient. His words carried the weight of someone who had stared into darkness and chosen to fight his way back toward the light. The legal proceedings against his attacker moved forward slowly, grinding through the complex machinery of criminal justice while wrestling fans and media watched with intense interest. Prosecutors built their case methodically, gathering evidence and witness testimony to support charges that could result in significant prison time. The defense attempted to argue that the attack occurred within the context of their profession, a desperate strategy that found little sympathy from legal experts or the public. The attacker's confident demeanor began to crack as reality set in, the consequences of his actions becoming undeniably real rather than abstract concepts he could dismiss with twisted rationalizations. His career was finished regardless of legal outcomes, his name would forever be associated with cowardice and assault rather than any in-ring accomplishments. Jacob Fatu'S story became bigger than just one attack or one bitter individual's descent into villainy. It sparked conversations about safety protocols, mental health support for wrestlers dealing with the pressures of the industry, and how companies handle conflicts before they escalate to violence. Reforms were proposed, some implemented, as the wrestling world grappled with ensuring that competition never again crossed into genuine attempts to injure. Fatu himself became an advocate for these changes, using his platform to push for better protections while continuing his rehabilitation. His determination inspired countless fans and fellow wrestlers who saw in him the embodiment of resilience and refusing to let others define your destiny. Months into his recovery, Jacob Fatu made his first public appearance at a wrestling event, not as a competitor but as a reminder of what the business should represent. The ovation he received was deafening, a standing tribute that lasted several minutes while he stood in the ring soaking in the moment. He spoke about his journey, the challenges he still faced, and his absolute commitment to returning to active competition when doctors cleared him. But more importantly, he spoke about forgiveness and moving forward, refusing to let bitterness consume him the way it had consumed his attacker. It was a masterclass in grace and strength, showing everyone watching that true power comes from how you respond to adversity rather than how you inflict it on others. The wrestling world now watches and waits for Jacob Fatu's eventual return, knowing that when it happens it will be one of the most emotional and significant moments in recent memory. His attacker sits in obscurity, career destroyed and facing legal consequences, a cautionary tale about what happens when jealousy and bitterness override common sense and basic human decency. The contrast between their paths couldn't be starker, one rising from ashes with dignity intact, the other falling into darkness of his own making. This story isn't just about an attack, it's about resilience, community, justice, and the ultimate triumph of character over cruelty. Make sure you're subscribed because when Jacob Fatu steps back into that ring, you'll want to witness every second of that incredible moment together with this community that stood by him through his darkest hours.